There's a 24-hour war going on. It's not just obviously on the battlefield, but in the narrative war as well. How do you think Israel is faring in that particular realm?
I think Israel has largely given up on the information war. I was just in Australia now. I did a day of speaking to politicians in Canberra, and they said, we want to help you. Why is Israel making it so difficult for us to help? Look, when this war began, Israel set up an emergency team in the Prime Minister's office, the IDF. Together we did 2,000 interviews over 6 months. That whole team has unraveled. I think Israel has allowed itself to think that it doesn't matter what people think around the world, they're always going to be against us, so why bother trying to persuade them? But it is a terrible mistake, because we're now fighting a war on 7 fronts in which our allies are pressuring us while subsidizing our enemies, and we need it to be the other way around. We need to be able to fight for our lives against the Iranian regime and its proxy armies on those 7 fronts, with our allies supporting us and pressuring our enemies. And it can be done. I've had so many conversations with policymakers, with journalists who are sympathetic to Israel. They need Israel to make the case better about what it is fighting for and how it is fighting.
So it seems like many have kind of taken after your leadership in terms of being an independent contractor of sorts, going out and making the case outside of the realm of, a government, bureaucracy. Do you feel that can be a winning strategy, or is that just a Band-Aid?
Speaking up from civil society is no replacement for the government doing its jobs and having a proper media operation. But since I was forced to resign as a government spokesman for political reasons that are by now well understood to everyone, I've been trying to encourage people to stand up, speak up, and be ordinary, everyday citizen spokespeople. That's the vision behind the Citizen Spokesperson's office. We're going to bring in former members of Knesset and ambassadors and elevate voices from the bottom, put them in a suit and tie in front of a flag and say, everyone can be a spokesperson. Because right now only 3 things matter, and I really care about nothing else. Hamas must go down, the hostages must go home, and Hezbollah must go away. And those 3 issues are things that everyone in Israel agrees on because our lives depend on them. So I'm trying to encourage Israelis, Jews around the diaspora, and allies, we have non-Jewish allies, to stand up, speak up, be counted, and stand up against the lies that have imported an increasingly deranged and violent protest movement to places like the United States, importing a kind of political violence that is being fueled by the deranged lies being told about Israel.
It's been a little bit surreal here over the last couple of days. 4,000 people here is more than I understand any in IAC Summit history. Everybody seems to be in a jovial mood, smiling, hugging, and yet what's going on is what's going on. Do you feel this is more of a support session, a therapy session, more than anything else here this weekend? Because what we're seeing here doesn't match the reality on the ground. It seems like everybody just needs a hug and a smile right now.
I think that what is so special about Israeli society is that we try to find normality in the most abnormal circumstances. We know that we can't let the terrorists keep us on edge and be in permanent Shiva mode all the time. You have to live your life. And there are moments when you recognize the awfulness of the situation we're in. At the plenary yesterday, everyone, singing the national anthems, a lot of pride, and then we stand for a minute's silence and you feel the punch in your gut. Events like this are important, not only because of the tools that people gain in the panels and from meeting the various speakers, but also from finding that reinforcement from each other. One of the most vicious things about the current wave of anti-Semitism is the gaslighting. It's the attempt to make people think that they are crazy, to make them doubt their own sanity, their morality, their humanity, and coming together with other supporters, Jews and non-Jews alike, to embrace each other and swap notes is a great way to remind ourselves what we're fighting for and who we're fighting for.
I'd ask you about British politics, but I'm not informed enough, so I'll ask you about something relevant here. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris declined to show up. Donald Trump takes the invitation and also spews some nonsense about Jews partially being to blame if he loses. I mean, is that helpful in the end to come and to make those sort of comments?
I'm not going to wade into American domestic politics.
I understand. And so I'll swing back to the other side then. In terms of your homeland, Britain, that is. I mean,
My homeland is Israel.
Well, you're original. Well, that's true. You moved. In any case, you know more about it than I do, obviously. There's been this pullback since the new government took over, and there's been tension now building between Israel and the United Kingdom government. Do you feel that can be rectified in some way, or do you feel it's going to be an antagonistic relationship until, something changes in one government or another?
The change in policy from the British government has been deeply disappointing. They have resumed funding for UNRWA, which is a Hamas front, while restricting arms sales to Israel. It means we are fighting against a common enemy of Britain as well, the Islamic Republic, against common enemies in the form of terrorist organizations they have prescribed, with one hand tied behind our back while our enemies are being subsidized. It's a terrible situation to be in. And it's a reminder of the failure of diplomacy and public diplomacy to help our allies understand why they need to stand together with us. That's part of the critical part of the information war. It's about reducing the pressure on our allies and helping them withstand that pressure. Britain still needs Israel to be able to win this war against the Iranian regime and its proxy armies, because otherwise Britain is next, and we're already seeing how the support for the Hamas agenda has brought chaos and instability to the streets of Britain as well. So we need our allies to stand up to the hatred, to the lies, to the propaganda, and say Hamas launched a vicious war on October 7th with a barbaric massacre. It's been joined by its terrorist proxies and by the Iranian regime, and we stand by our allies as they fight to safeguard their borders and repel the threats from those borders.
Last question for you. Israeli politicians don't underestimate the media. I mean, they play the media as much as they can domestically, but as you mentioned, internationally, they don't really seem to value it very much. They don't really seem to care what the international media thinks, what it's reporting on. I mean, why do you think that is, that they take so much value and take so much political capital and energy in trying to play to the domestic market and don't give a hoot about the international media in such a perilous time?
Politicians like doing domestic media interviews because they want to speak to voters and they want votes. That's not a difficult one. Internationally, I think they're making a terrible mistake by thinking that the information war is just about whether people somewhere in America or Australia are going to like us. It's not about whether they're going to like us. It's about whether while we're fighting on 7 fronts, we have to wake up and fight with the rest of the world at the same time, or whether we have our allies behind us understanding why we are fighting. Because when this war ends, and please God it will end soon, with the safe return of all of the hostages, we need to rebuild our relationships with our allies, and we need to emerge stronger where our supporters around the world understand why we did what we did and respect us for it. Because if the campaign against Israel succeeds and this war ends with good, ordinary people convinced that Israel is a white, supremacist, colonial, fascist, genocide state, whatever, blah, 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 the world will be less safe for Israel and less safe for the Jews in those countries as well. This is what is at stake. Iran, the Palestinian nationalists, the terrorists want to destroy Israel. To destroy Israel, they think it will be much easier if the world thinks that Israel deserves to be destroyed. That is the goal of the campaign of lies against Israel, and that's why it's so important to withstand it, so that Israel can stand against the threat on the front